Joseph was a young boy, the youngest of 12 brothers. His father Jacob loved him the most. This made his brothers really jealous, especially when Joseph had a dream. In his dream, Joseph saw himself and his brothers out in the fields, and suddenly, his brothers' sheaves of grain bowed down to his. He couldn't wait to share this dream with his family, but when he did, his brothers became even angrier. They couldn't stand the thought of him being more important than they were. His father, Jacob, also got upset, but quietly wondered what the dream meant. Joseph's dream was not just a fantasy, it was a message from God. Even though Joseph was the youngest, God had big plans for him. But his brothers didn't understand this. They were so filled with jealousy that they plotted to get rid of Joseph. They didn't want him to rule over them. This episode teaches us that when God gives us dreams and promises, not everyone will understand. But we are still called to hold on to those dreams and trust that God has a purpose for our lives, even when others doubt us or get jealous. Joseph's story reminds us that our dreams are not just for us, but for something much greater. God's plans may take time to unfold and they may cause tension with others, but if we stay faithful, God will make his purposes clear. So even when others don't believe in us, we must trust in the dreams God has given us and keep walking toward them with faith. Joseph's brothers couldn't stand the idea that he would rule over them. They were so jealous of him that they decided to get rid of him. One day, when Joseph went to check on his brothers while they were taking care of their sheep, they saw an opportunity. They threw Joseph into an empty pit, and at first they thought about leaving him there to die. But then, they saw a group of traders coming by and decided to sell Joseph as a slave instead. They took his special coat, dipped it in animal blood, and showed it to their father, Jacob, telling him that Joseph had been killed by a wild animal. Jacob was heartbroken and believed it to be true. Joseph's brothers did all of this out of jealousy and anger. They couldn't stand seeing their father's love for Joseph. But even though they betrayed him, God had a plan for Joseph's life that no one could stop. This episode teaches us about the destructive power of jealousy. When we let jealousy and anger take over, we can make decisions that hurt others. But even when people betray us, God can still use those moments for his greater purpose. Joseph's story shows us that even when life is hard and people hurt us, we can trust God to turn things around for good. After being sold by his brothers, Joseph found himself on a long journey to Egypt. He was taken there as a slave, far from home and family. But even in this difficult situation, Joseph didn't lose his faith. When he arrived in Egypt, he was sold to Potiphar, an important official in Pharaoh's palace. At first, Joseph could have been angry and bitter, but instead, he chose to trust that God had a plan for him. He worked hard and stayed faithful to God. Because of Joseph's hard work and trust in God, Potiphar soon saw that Joseph was trustworthy and put him in charge of his entire household. Joseph didn't let his circumstances define him. He knew that even though life seemed unfair, God was still with him. This episode teaches us that trusting God's plan isn't easy, but it's always worth it. Joseph's story shows us that no matter where we are or what we're facing, God can still use us to do great things. We may not always understand why things happen, but we can trust that God is working everything out for good. Joseph's faithfulness in slavery shows that God's purposes are bigger than our circumstances. Joseph's faithfulness was soon tested in Potiphar's house. Potiphar's wife noticed Joseph's good looks and asked him to do something sinful. But Joseph knew that it was wrong, not just against Potiphar, but against God. He refused, saying, "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" But Potiphar's wife didn't take no for an answer. When Joseph refused again, she falsely accused him of trying to hurt her, and Joseph was thrown into prison. Even though Joseph had done the right thing, he was still punished. But through it all, Joseph remained faithful to God. This episode highlights the importance of integrity. Joseph's story teaches us that doing the right thing is not always easy, but it is always worth it. When we face temptation or pressure, we must choose to do what pleases God, even if others don't understand. Joseph shows us that standing firm in our integrity may not always bring immediate rewards, but God sees our hearts and will reward us in his perfect time. Joseph's choice to honor God, even in a tough situation, is a powerful example for us to follow. After being falsely accused, Joseph was thrown into prison. He could have been angry and bitter about his situation, but instead, he chose to trust that God still had a plan for him. While in prison, Joseph continued to be faithful, and his integrity shone through. He worked hard and took care of those around him. Eventually, Joseph was put in charge of all the prisoners, and even in this difficult place, God's favor was upon him. Joseph didn't let his prison cell define him. Instead of focusing on his circumstances, he focused on God and trusted that he was still working. This episode shows us the importance of trusting God in the waiting. Sometimes life feels like a prison, when we're stuck in situations that we don't understand or can't change. But Joseph's story teaches us that even in the waiting, God is working. He is using our trials to prepare us for something greater. We can find peace and hope in knowing that just like Joseph, God has a plan for our lives, even when we're in difficult seasons. Joseph's story reminds us that waiting is not wasted time. God is always working behind the scenes, preparing us for the next step in his plan. While in prison, Joseph's gift of interpreting dreams began to manifest in a powerful way. One day, two prisoners, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, had strange dreams. They were troubled, so Joseph, being faithful and attentive, asked them to share their dreams with him. God revealed the meaning of their dreams to Joseph. To the cupbearer, he prophesied that he would be restored to his position, and to the baker, he foretold his death. Both came true as Joseph had said. This episode teaches us the power of using our gifts for God's glory, no matter our circumstances. Joseph had been a slave and was now in prison, but he still chose to use his ability to help others. Joseph's interpretation of dreams showed that God's gifts are not tied to our status or position. They are given to us to serve others and fulfill God's purpose. This episode encourages us to use our talents no matter where we are in life, and to trust that God has a plan to use them for his kingdom. Joseph's faithfulness in prison would soon lead to his release, and his gift of dream interpretation would lead to his destiny being fulfilled. After Joseph interpreted the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker, he was soon called upon to interpret Pharaoh's dream. Pharaoh had two dreams that troubled him deeply. One of 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 skinny cows, and another of 7 healthy ears of grain being devoured by 7 withered ears. None of Pharaoh's magicians or wise men could interpret the dreams, so the cupbearer remembered Joseph's gift and recommended him. Joseph, with God's help, revealed that the dreams foretold 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. He advised Pharaoh to store up food during the years of plenty to survive the coming famine. Pharaoh was so impressed with Joseph's wisdom that he made him second in command over all of Egypt. This episode highlights how God's timing is always perfect. Joseph, once a slave and prisoner, was now in a position of power, and his gift of interpreting dreams was used for God's greater purpose. Job's journey teaches us that no matter how difficult our journey may seem, God can elevate us to places we never imagined. Joseph's story shows that God is always preparing us for greater things, even when we don't see it at the time. After interpreting Pharaoh's dream, Joseph was appointed as the second in command of Egypt. He was given the responsibility of overseeing the storage of food during the years of abundance, preparing Egypt for the 7 years of famine that would follow. Joseph's rise to power didn't happen overnight. It was a result of his unwavering faith, integrity, and trust in God's plan. As the years of famine began, Egypt had more than enough food because of Joseph's careful planning. During this time, people from surrounding nations came to Egypt to buy grain, and this included Joseph's brothers, who didn't recognize him. When they arrived, Joseph remembered his dreams, and the stage was set for the reconciliation he had been waiting for. This episode teaches us that God's plans may take time to unfold, but when we trust his timing, he will elevate us to places of influence and impact. Joseph's integrity, leadership, and wisdom made him a trustworthy leader. Even in a foreign land, Joseph remained faithful to God and was able to fulfill God's plan. This episode reminds us that our purpose is not defined by our circumstances, but by our faith and obedience to God. After the famine reached Canaan, Joseph's brothers came to Egypt to buy grain. When they stood before Joseph, they didn't recognize him, but Joseph recognized them. At that moment, Joseph had the opportunity to take revenge, but instead he tested his brothers. He wanted to see if they had changed. He accused them of being spies and demanded that they bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, to prove their story. This episode focuses on Joseph's test of forgiveness. He could have chosen to harbor resentment, but instead he sought reconciliation. He wanted to see if his brothers had repented for their betrayal. This episode challenges us to reflect on how we respond when others hurt us. Joseph's willingness to forgive and test his brothers' hearts shows us that true forgiveness isn't about just letting go of the past. It's about seeing if those who hurt us have truly changed. Joseph's story reminds us that forgiveness is a process, but it's a necessary step toward healing and restoration. Joseph could no longer hold back his emotions when he saw his brothers, and he finally revealed himself to them. The moment was filled with tears, but also with forgiveness. Joseph forgave his brothers for selling him into slavery, understanding that God had used their actions for a greater purpose. He told them, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." This episode reflects on the power of reconciliation and the transformative nature of forgiveness. Job's brothers were overwhelmed by his mercy, and they were humbled by his forgiveness. Joseph's story shows us that reconciliation is not about forgetting the past, but about choosing to forgive and move forward. When we forgive, we align ourselves with God's heart, who forgives us daily. This episode teaches us that forgiveness doesn't only bring peace to the person who has been wronged, but it also brings healing to the one who offers it. Job's willingness to forgive his brothers, despite all they had done to him, shows us that true peace comes when we let go of bitterness and embrace God's love.